The dust hasn't even settled yet. Thomas Cray kneels in the red dirt outside his cabin, cradling a man he's never met before today. The stranger's breath comes in wet, rattling gasps, each one slower than the last. Blood darkens the fabric of his shirt, pooling against Thomas's worn denim jacket. Behind him, 3 riders disappear into the haze on the ridge. Their gunshots still echo in the canyon. The birds have gone silent. The stranger's hand grips Thomas's arm with surprising strength. His lips move. Thomas leans close, catching only fragments. Map, they can't know. Bury it with me. Then nothing. The hand goes slack. The eyes, blue, desperate, carrying the weight of some terrible knowledge, they close for the last time. Thomas sits there, holding a dead man, feeling the last warmth drain from the body. The map crinkles in the stranger's back pocket. Thomas's fingers brush it without meaning to. He looks down at what he's holding, and everything changes. But before this moment shattered his world, let me take you back to where it all began. 3 days earlier, Thomas was a man of routine. Every morning he rose before dawn. The cabin, built with his own hands 14 years ago, was quiet, except for the creaking of the floorboards. He lost his wife, Catherine, to fever in that very cabin. That was 9 years back. She died holding his hand, and he'd buried her on the hill overlooking the valley. Some men would have left. Thomas stayed. The land knew him. The silence was company enough. He rode out to check his herd in the morning, cold, breath hanging in clouds before him. The ranch was small, maybe 200 head, but it was his. No debts to anyone, no ties except to this unforgiving country that asked nothing but respect and hard work. By afternoon, he'd fixed a section of fence the winter had torn down. By evening, he sat on the porch with strong coffee and watched the sun bleed orange into the western sky. This was his life. Predictable, lonely maybe, but safe. That's when he saw the rider. The man came from the north, moving fast, but not panicked, not yet. Thomas noticed immediately that he rode like someone being chased, the kind of posture that comes from looking over your shoulder too many times. The stranger was gaunt, maybe 40, with a face weathered beyond his years. His horse was spent, foam at his mouth. His clothes were torn. "Water, please. I need water." Thomas didn't ask questions. Out here, you help. That was the code. He brought the stranger inside, gave him fresh water, bread, and a place to rest. The man collapsed on Thomas's cot like he hadn't slept in days. Within minutes, he was unconscious. Thomas sat outside watching the dark gather, wondering who or what was following this broken stranger into his quiet life. The stranger stayed 3 days. His name, he said, was James Coulter. He was a surveyor, he claimed, mapping the territories for the railroad company coming through in the spring. That's what he said when he was lucid enough to speak, but Thomas noticed the inconsistencies. A surveyor wouldn't have a fresh bullet graze along his ribs. A surveyor wouldn't wake up screaming about riders in the night. And a surveyor definitely wouldn't have a leather journal filled with something far more dangerous than railroad routes. Thomas found it the second evening. Coulter had left it on the table, and Thomas, not snooping, just tied in, noticed the sketches. They weren't survey maps. They were property lines, building locations, names, and beside those names were numbers, amounts, money. When Coulter caught him looking at it, his hand moved to a hidden knife faster than should have been possible for a dying man. "Don't," Coulter said, just that one word, loaded with all the weight of a man protecting something that had already cost him everything. Thomas backed away. "It's your business." "It is," Coulter said, breathing hard, "and if you're smart, it'll stay that way." But it was too late. Thomas had seen enough to know that whatever Coulter was carrying, whatever was drawn on those pages, it was the reason men were riding hard in the dark. It was the reason Coulter looked out the window every time the wind moved the trees. That night, Thomas heard Coulter moving around the cabin, not sleeping, pacing, muttering prayers to a God that didn't seem to be listening. "They're close," Coulter said to Thomas as dawn broke. "Closer than I thought. The railroad's paying them. Maybe the territorial governor, too. It doesn't matter. I can't lead them here. Not to you." "Then go," Thomas said. He meant it to be kind, but it came out cold. Coulter smiled, sad and knowing. There's nowhere left to go. That was the moment Thomas understood. This man wasn't a fugitive running towards something. He was a man running out of time.
The storm came that third morning. Not the weather kind, but the human kind. 3 riders appeared on the northern ridge just after sunrise. Thomas spotted them from the south pasture where he was mending fence. He knew immediately they weren't looking to buy cattle or trade provisions. He rode back hard. Coulter was already packed. He'd known somehow. Maybe he'd heard the horses. Maybe he just felt death coming and recognized its approach. "You need to ride," Coulter said. "Head to town. Tell the sheriff—" He stopped. His eyes went distant. "No, don't tell anyone. The sheriff's already paid for." "Then what do I do?" Thomas asked. "You survive. That's all any of us can do." Coulter pulled the leather journal from inside his jacket and thrust it into Thomas's hands. Thomas tried to refuse, but Coulter's grip was iron. "If I don't make it, and I know I won't, you bury this with me, or you burn it. I don't care which. Just don't let 'em have it. Don't let 'em know it ever existed." The riders were visible now on the plain, moving at a steady pace, not rushing, confident. They knew he was here. Thomas wanted to tell Coulter to ride, wanted to offer his fastest horse, wanted to do something to prevent what he already knew was coming. But Coulter just shook his head. "I'm done running," the man said. His voice was calm now, accepting. "This is where it ends." Coulter walked outside to meet him. Thomas watched from inside the cabin, the journal burning in his hands like it was made of fire. He heard the conversation. Couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear. Negotiation, threats, desperation meeting indifference. Then Coulter turned and looked directly at the cabin window, directly at Thomas. Their eyes locked for just a moment. In that moment, Thomas understood what Coulter had already decided. Coulter ran, not away, toward the 3 riders with his hands empty and his chest bare. "Here," he shouted, "I'm here. This is what you came for." The gunshots came immediately, quick, professional, 3 riders who'd done this before. Thomas heard Coulter cry out once, not in pain, but in something like relief, before the shooting stopped. Thomas was outside without remembering how he got there, moving without thinking, running toward a dead man because staying inside would mean accepting that he'd let it happen, that he could have done something and chose not to. The lead rider, a man with a scarred face and cold eyes, raised his gun toward Thomas. "Don't," he said, but Thomas was already kneeling, already catching Coulter as his legs gave out. The stranger fell into his arms, and Thomas sank into the dirt with him. The scarred man dismounted. "The journal, where is it?" Coulter's eyes found Thomas. A message, a warning. "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said. The scarred man didn't believe him. He walked toward the cabin. His partners followed. They tore through Thomas's home like it was nothing, overturning his table, ripping open his mattress, searching with the fury of men who'd already failed once and wouldn't again. But Thomas had hidden the journal. The moment Coulter had given it to him, some instinct had kicked in. It was buried now, wrapped in oilcloth beneath the loose floorboard where Catherine's wedding ring lay. They didn't find it. The scarred man emerged from the cabin, furious and empty-handed. He looked at Coulter's body, then at Thomas. There was a moment, a terrible, stretching moment where Thomas thought this was how it ended, 2 graves on this land instead of 1. But the scarred man just spat. "You picked the wrong man to die for," he said. They rode out the way they'd come. Just like that, the threat spent, the mission incomplete. Thomas was left kneeling in the dirt with a dead man in his arms and the weight of secrets he'd never wanted to carry.
Thomas buried Coulter on the hill beside Catherine. It took him all day. The earth was hard, resistant. With every shovel of dirt, Thomas found himself thinking about his wife, about the last words they'd spoken, about the way he'd held her hand and promised to keep living, even when living felt impossible. At night, by lamplight, in his cabin, Thomas opened the journal. The pages told a story that shattered his understanding of the world he thought he knew. The railroad wasn't just building tracks through these territories. It was stealing land, falsifying claims, bribing officials. And among those officials, among those taking the money, was the territorial governor. But there was more. One name appeared again and again in Coulter's notes: Thomas Cray. His name. The entries were old, going back years. Coulter had been surveying this land long before he arrived at Thomas's door, long before Thomas had even known such a thing was happening. The journal contained maps of Thomas's property, notes about water sources, grazing land, the location of minerals in the bedrock. And in the margins, Coulter had written, "The widow's husband was killed by railroad men. 1889. Same land, same claim dispute." They made it look like a cattle accident. It wasn't. Thomas felt the room spin. Catherine's brother had died in a riding accident 14 years before. Thomas had always believed it was just bad luck, a horse stumbling, a fall that broke the man's neck. Catherine had grieved, but she'd accepted it as frontier life. Thomas had never questioned it. Coulter had been tracking the truth. For years he'd been documenting the crimes, gathering evidence, trying to expose the railroad's theft and corruption. But they'd found him, discovered he had proof, and they'd hunted him down. The last entry in the journal was dated the day before Coulter arrived at Thomas's cabin. Going to a man named Cray. He lost family to these vultures too, though he doesn't know it. The map stays with him. Whatever happens to me, the truth survives. It has to. It's the only thing that matters anymore. The only thing Catherine deserves, God rest her, and the only thing Cray deserves to know. Thomas sat in that cabin holding the journal and wept for the first time since burying his wife. He hadn't just been holding a dying stranger. He'd been holding a man who'd spent years searching for justice for people he'd never met, who'd believed that truth mattered more than his own life. Coulter had died so the map wouldn't. By spring, the railroad came through. But it came through with federal investigators in tow. Thomas had found a way to get the journal to an honest man in the capital city, a land officer who still believed in law. The documentation was irrefutable, the scheme unraveled. The territorial governor was arrested. The railroad lost its contracts. The families whose land had been stolen were compensated. It wasn't perfect. The men who'd shot Coulter were never caught. The scarred-faced rider disappeared into the territories and was never found. Justice, even when it finally came, left wounds that never quite healed. But the land was returned, the thieves were exposed, and the frontier, so accustomed to being victimized by powerful men, got to see just once that there were consequences. Thomas kept 2 graves on the hill now. Catherine and James Coulter rested side by side. He'd carved a name on Coulter's headstone, his real name,
Thomas had discovered, and below it, he believed in truth. Every morning now, when Thomas walked that hill, he understood something he hadn't before. The frontier wasn't just about surviving. It was about carrying forward the stories of those who'd paid too high a price to be remembered. James Coulter had died in a stranger's arms, but he didn't die unknown. And that, somehow, mattered. Thank you for listening to this tale here on Frontier Love Tools. A stranger died in Thomas Cray's arms, but he left behind something that changed everything, not just for one man, but for an entire territory. He left behind the truth. If you enjoyed this story of courage, sacrifice, and frontier justice, make sure you subscribe, because out here, every sunset hides another story waiting to be told. Stories of love, stories of loss, stories of men and women who believed that truth mattered, even when it cost everything. We'll see you next time.